Hi, welcome to ChefConf. I'm Stephanie, and today I'm speaking with my buddy.
Chris Todd, I'm the Vice President of Engineering for TapHere Technology.
Yeah, we are so excited to talk to you today about managing teams in this new world. This current year that we're working in, things look different than they have before. How do we face these new challenges? So let's go ahead and jump into a little bit more about us real quick. I'm Stephanie Langen. I am a computer scientist and DevOps engineer for TapHere Technology. I work mostly in the Fed space, but also support other military entities and commercial customers for Chef. So basically, I go in as a consultant and I help teams get up and running with Chef technologies.
And I'm Chris Todd. I'm one of the founders of TapHere. I've been working with TapHere since 2004, also focused on both the Fed space and the intelligence community. And we've been working with Chef since about 2013. So we've been pretty deeply embedded with Chef for a long time now. Been to a lot of ChefConfs and glad to be at this one.
Okay, so let's jump in and set the stage. Teams today are different than they've looked like before. Instead of having this physical workplace where everyone gathers, we kind of have a global office. This means that the workplace is not just one physical place. Everyone's working from their homes, as we are right now. And it's just different how we communicate, and it's different the way that we interact with each other. All of our engineers that are working together are still trying to touch the same code, but everyone is distributed. Team members are constantly learning new things, are getting better. New technologies are constantly arising. Technology is constantly progressing. And so with all of this change, we're still trying to stay connected even while we're distributed.
So given this new world that we're living in today, how do we have the confidence that we're actually producing the best code that we can create? Everything's different. People are all over the place, but we still want to make sure that we're producing good code for our customers and for our fellow developers.
A big piece of creating code that we can be confident in is in how our team communicates.
So we wanted to talk about how we talk about things day to day within the team, right? Just your everyday routine, everything that people do one day at a time. And we also want to talk about our direction that we take from leaders and as leaders, that we're all leaders here, I think, to a different degree, right? Everyone's really a leader. And then we also want to talk about the actual people processes, right? Meaning the actual path that we go through as people to work our development and to actually interact with each other and the actual technical work that we're doing. And we're doing that through automation and through using shared code.
So let's go ahead and jump in with what that day-to-day communication looks like within your team, team member to team member.
So tools. Tools are probably one of the biggest things that people focus on when they think about communication, right? We've all worked with the Atlassian stack. We're working on Zoom right now. Everyone has Teams, Zoom, Mattermost, Slack, all these tools on their phone, on their iPad, on their laptop. What we find is that a lot of times your team will end up working to your tools, right? You're focused around your Jira, you're focused around your email, your chat. And that kind of poses a bit of a challenge, right? The tool isn't supposed to be what creates your process. The people are supposed to be creating the processes around your tools. Tools are dependency. We all need them. We live by them today, but they can also be a really big roadblock, right? Everybody has trouble sometimes shifting between email to chat, understanding when we should pick up the phone and actually talk to somebody, when we want to use something threaded for the record, or when we want to actually get something that's just a quick, hey, can you fix this for me? Can you tell me how this works? There's all these different forms in these tools that we have right now. And we want to make sure that we focus on the person-to-person interactions that are best, not the tool itself. So we want to balance those face-to-face interactions that we have all the time, using things like Teams to talk like we are now, or using parallel methods where I can be working on something and putting ideas in chat, or I can hit someone up and say, look, get back to me in a few hours, that's fine, without having to write a formal email. We also talk a lot about meetings, right? Meetings are a big part of development these days. And I don't know about you, but I know that I have what I would term meeting overload. I have day-to-day, hour-to-hour, just nonstop meetings. Talking to someone is crucial, right? But not everything has to be a meeting. Not everything should be a meeting. Sometimes it's one-on-one. And that's what a lot of folks forget too. If we want to have a meeting, let's have a meeting, but let's make sure that it's valuable. If a meeting could have been an email, make it an email. If it could have been a chat, make it a chat. But if you feel you need to get with someone right now, pick up that phone and call them, and don't just rely on an email and wait for a few days.
Exactly. I think one of the big things that people fall into the habit of when working remotely is that they lose that ability to just walk over to someone's desk and ask a quick question. And sometimes those things that you might need to draw out in a paragraph in a chat because you're trying to explain something technical, you're trying to ask a question about how something works. That is the kind of thing that's really helpful, to just call someone and not being afraid to just cold call someone on Teams. That being said, it's also okay to say no to those types of conversations, and say no to those things and be comfortable communicating your boundaries as a team member, communicating what you do or you don't have time for. A big piece of this is, responding, hey, I'm busy, I'll call you back later, and no one gets offended because everyone's on the same page about what needs to get done and what kind of support we can offer each other.
Absolutely.
Another way that we can communicate within our team is through code. Chef has developed a way of turning infrastructure into code, configuration as code, compliance as code, and our policy as code. So we can look at code as another way that we communicate, and let's focus in on what does communication as code mean. This means that our communication has become codified, which means that all of our code can be version controlled. All of our code is repeatable, and it is available for the whole team to see. So this communication, this story of what we're working on, this story of what we're doing, what we're building, is something that we can go and look back on at any time. And we can see over time how it's changed. Also, Chef offers specific features that make it a lot easier for us to communicate through our code. You can take this one, Chris.
Sure. So as an old school computer science person, right? I think you remember in the day, they used to have these code contests to see how concise and how obfuscated you'd get a program in like a single line of code. That's really clever, but now is not the time to be doing things like that, right? We want our code actually to be fairly verbose. We want to actually spell out what we're doing step by step. We want to use the features available in the language and in the domain-specific languages, such as InSpec, to really show the processes that we're trying to automate and put that out there so someone who might not even be an expert in it can pick it up. InSpec's a great example. We have a lot of security folks on our team over working for the Space Force. A lot of those people are not computer scientists. They are not people that can pick up any language, understand Boolean logic, and understand all these things that you might read in, and for a computer science person, it comes as second nature. InSpec is really great because we can put those descriptions in there. We can tag things. We can put the weights on how important things are. And then we write things as a process. When this, do this. If not, do that. Then write this out. These are the kind of things that we want to litter our code with right now. Use a lot of inline documentation in plain English and use our code as a way to self-document. Use tools like Pandoc, put things in there so you can actually extract that documentation from the code. Use things like Cook Style. We're going to get on that in a little bit, talking about consistency. Consistency is key when you're using code as communication.
Exactly. And these features that InSpec has, like writing code as plain English, like Chris said, make it so much easier for people who aren't familiar to pick up on, and also make it easier to take at a glance, just read the plain English keywords and just understand what's going on. And so really relying heavily on those features that Chef offers lends itself to work within a team, to that easy communication of what exactly is going on. So now let's go ahead and talk about what communication looks like from leadership, the direction, the tone that you set as a leader to your team.
So as a leader, your job is to create an understanding of the requirements and dependencies and blockers that you're going to run into, but it's also to understand what your team needs. You're a facilitator, right? So this is always a two-way street. A leader never just speaks down and issues orders, and a leader never just says, all right, well, I'm going to go take care of putting out fires. You've got to do both, right? And you need to create that atmosphere that allows that. So communication comes first, like we've been saying. You need to really emphasize that there is no such thing as a dumb question. There are people on your team that might have 40 years of experience. There are people on your team that might have 4 weeks of experience. That's the world we're living in right now. People are moving around. People are coming into the tech field and leaving. There are people that have been here forever. Nobody should ever be afraid to ask anything, regardless of the content or how long they've been on the team. And things should be openly stated, not cryptic, not, well, you know, that thing that we did. Come out, say it. And as a leader, you need to protect that. That's your job, number one. You also need to spread ownership. And this is an interesting balance, right? You don't want to create silos of experts where, well, there's only one person that knows how to run this code. But you also want to create ownership because every person on a team should feel responsible as a contributor to something. And once someone has that little area that they can understand, people can come to them and they can share that knowledge. We want to make sure that people own those pieces, but we also are spreading that across the entire team. It's a delicate balance. We also want to encourage folks to step outside of their comfort zone. If you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you're going to become that oracle on the mount that never, learns anything new, but is the expert in one thing. That doesn't grow teams. That doesn't expand communication. That doesn't eliminate single points of failure. You can have experts. We all love experts. I love meeting somebody that knows everything about Kubernetes or that is a wizard at virtualization or something like that. But we don't want them to be the only point of knowledge, right? We want to be able to go to them, ask, but also be able to get different opinions and different ideas. And also when we're talking in general about communication, we need to talk about the order that things get done. A lot of people skip things like planning. They say, all right, well, everybody knows how you're going to do this, right? No, we need to spell out as leaders. I need you to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to get together on this, and then we're going to review that. Raise risks and concerns. And Stephanie, you can talk a little bit more about risks and concerns. We want to make sure that if somebody's got something to say, that they're able to say it.
Exactly. And this candid conversation that you have with your team makes people feel comfortable about not knowing, right? Like things are changing so often, and it's okay to like not exactly know what's going to happen, what can go wrong, right? Like you might come up with this amazing project plan, you assign your points, you get these out to people, and then when something goes wrong, that person might feel like they've done something bad to create the situation where they're taking extra time on a task, or they're running into these roadblocks that they didn't expect. So really trying to get ahead of those pieces and trying to talk about the things that can be gotchas, the things that can go sideways, can really add confidence to your team in feeling like they have support going through those roadblocks.
Absolutely. Raise those risks, get them out there.
And now let's talk about what just general day-to-day communication looks like from leadership. We talked a little bit about meetings and meeting overload, but truly it is important to meet with your team and to be communicating often. We use the word scrums here because we are used to doing that on our teams, but it doesn't have to be a particular management style or particular set of meetings that you have. The point is to be present in your team and to be a good facilitator. You want to make sure that you can kind of gauge the room, gauge your team, and kind of control some of those things that happen with personalities and things that happen when teams are left, without a leader. Sometimes when no one's leading in the room, a natural leader will arise. And this means that there might be always one loud voice in the room. There might be someone who really is a subject matter expert who's great at talking about something, but sometimes when there's not someone to kind of mediate those voices, the smaller ones or the quieter voices might get left out. And so the point is to really make sure that all ideas can be brought to light and that everyone has a chance to speak. This is about creating an environment of psychological safety where everyone feels comfortable asking questions, speaking up regularly, and where everyone really feels confident about their work and about what they're tasked with when they leave the meeting.
So, well, everyone's voice has to be listened to, right? Leaders are important. A lot of folks like to have this idea of a dream of a flat organization. And you don't have to be like, a real hierarchical build here, but somebody needs to be able to take control. And that's more about protection. That's not about really guiding or forcing anything to happen. It's about protecting both sides of that personality bell curve, right? The folks that we all know that we've worked with that are always raising things up, and the people that would really rather not talk unless you drag it out of them. Now, we're not trying to make anyone uncomfortable, right? We want to make sure that we can say, hey, let's see what a few other people have to say. That's a great idea. Let's bring in this person to see if they have anything to add to that. Make it comfortable. Don't force anybody. If somebody doesn't want to talk, they don't have to. If somebody wants to talk, let them get their voice out. But don't let anyone take control and take over. And you can do that in a friendly way with this idea of psychological safety and the idea that we as leaders are facilitators. We're here to make it easier for the developers and make sure that everybody's working off the same page.
Absolutely. Well said. So now let's talk about those people processes. Real quick, Chris, can you let the audience know what we mean when we say people processes?
Sure. We're talking about the path that everybody goes down in common, right? When you are a developer, there are things that you do to solve problems and get things done. And generally everybody on the team, now everybody works differently and has their own internal processes, but working with other people, there should be things that everybody does and everybody understands as checkpoints, as parts of getting to that solved problem that we're all understanding we have to do. Things like peer reviews, things like scrums, things like technical exchange meetings, documentation, retrospectives, and maybe just a little, vent session if you need it, if there's been a really tough thing that you solved. These are problems that we should all, or processes that we should all get used to and work together and have that path in common as a team.
Cool. So let's go ahead and dive deeper into some of those people processes. The first one being test-driven development. So this is like a common way of writing code. I don't want to say that I'm coming up with some new thing, but this is something that really is easier to do within the Chef space. Chef has designed its technologies to be developed with tests in mind, with testing at the forefront. So everyone should be on board with a systematic way of defining your requirements up front, with writing the test for what objectives you have. Particularly with cookbooks, you have the ability to write your inspect tests ahead of time before you even start writing your code. And then you can develop your code to those tests. And then when you're running Test Kitchen, you have the ability to see those tests turn green one by one, knowing that you've hit all of your goals. And this really indicates a form of communication, these green and red. You can see really clearly, okay, what is passing, what is not passing. And so this communicates to anyone who's running this Test Kitchen on this piece of code, kind of, has it met our organizational goals? Has it met the objective of what this code is supposed to do?
And one thing I want to underscore, and we won't go long on test-driven development because everyone knows what it is, right? It should be common sense at this point. But something, and this goes back to my 2018 ChefConf talk, if you want to look it up, don't be afraid of the red. And that's something that I really want to hammer home to folks. Don't write your tests so they pass early. Don't write your tests so they pass at all at first. You want lots of failure early. Every piece of code that you write, if it's greenfield, won't pass your test because you haven't written the code. You want to fail fast and fail early. I want tests that just show everything that's wrong. Get it out there early. Tell me the ugly truth of what's going on with the code. And I just lost the lights there. So I want that communicated to everybody on the team. And it's not about blame. There's never should be blame with test-driven development. If your test doesn't work, that's a problem to be solved. That's why you're here. That's the job you're doing. You're solving problems. If everything works the minute that we wrote it, you and I all would be out of a job. So Fail fast, fail early, and let everyone know where the problems are. Don't hide them.
Exactly. And another way that we have processes that involve people is through our peer review process. So Chris, I'll go ahead and let you talk a little bit about peer reviews.
Yeah, and peer review is another thing that a lot of folks think, oh, it's common sense, we're going to do it. But there's some nuance to peer review, and especially in today's day and age where you have to be a little bit more judicious about peer review. One thing is peer review is not only a tool to gate things in. Peer review is a tool if you're solving a problem when you want to get out of that tunnel vision mode. I know I've looked at code for hours and missed the silliest thing because I was focusing on all the deep, complex architecture, and I'm missing that I used the wrong operator or I put something in the wrong place. Get a fresh set of eyes in there. Even if they're not experienced in the code, sometimes that's better. Sometimes someone who's fresh and is just learning is more adept at pointing out the little gotchas than somebody who's got 20 years looking at it. Having multiple eyes on the code that gets pushed to your cookbooks, do it regularly, right? Get people together. We do every Wednesday at 2 o'clock, we do a peer review and merge request. Even if we don't have a lot, we talk about, well, here's something to look at, right? Get people in the habit of getting together. And don't promote that code, by the way. There is still a gating until you have X number of reviews, and that X needs to be more than 2. It can't just be a developer and your best bud. It can't just be your leader who wants to get things done. You need to add somebody who doesn't know what's going on, A, for them to learn, and B, to say, wait a minute, you guys have been stuck in solving this for the past week, but I think that doesn't look right. That's the type of person you need to get at least 3 people to look at it and 1 person from what I would call the outside of the problem. Leadership needs to encourage those new eyes on review. That might mean naming some names. Some people are going to be new and some people have been here forever. Even old coders like myself, see the gray, forget brackets or semicolons, okay? So Steph, why don't we talk a little bit more about some of the other tools that we can use inside peer reviews to get people to actually, really participate with those?
Absolutely. Using alerts and triggers or whatever features that your repository offers is going to be a great way to actually notify members when their review is needed. I know on teams that I've worked on, you usually just get a chat message here or there. Hey, can you review my code? It's usually from your bud, someone that you review their code often. But this really is a feature that allows you to notify team members and notify team members that are outside of that inner circle of who might usually be looking at that code. Another thing that you can do to make the peer review process easier as a developer is to be really verbose in your documentation. So while you're writing your code, you want to be really clear about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and explain anything that might not be immediately obvious. This tells people what you did. It makes it easier for them to understand your code and to review it. Another piece, and we'll kind of dive deeper into this a little bit later, is to use automation to run your tests. This might mean having a test kitchen run get immediately kicked off by a pipeline when you push in your code. That way, there is a result of those tests that you've written for that person who's reviewing your merge request to see without them actually needing to pull down your code manually and run those tests. This means that they can immediately look at that green and red output and determine, okay, have we met the objectives right away? And this adds a lot of confidence to their ability to put a stamp on your code. So let's talk a little bit more about those automated processes.
Chef is all about automation, so this is where we're going to really kind of hammer home some of those ideas.
Absolutely. One thing is Test Kitchen. This is a huge tool that we use on my team. All of the time, we're trying to test our code. We're writing tests before we develop our code. We're running our tests throughout every step of our pipeline. And Test Kitchen is really what enables us to see what this will look like in the wild, what this will look like in real life. So where possible, we try to develop a Test Kitchen environment that closely mirrors the actual setup of our nodes in production. This allows us to keep the variability of our results low from environment to environment, so we don't have as many surprises when we move up to production. However, we know that in most cases, there are going to be unavoidable differences between our test environment, our staging, and our production environment. And so we try to keep those really well documented. if you write tests for a particular test machine, it's important to note that there might be differences, or to make sure that everyone understands what those differences are ahead of time, especially when we're trying to push this code through multiple levels of environments. And this can actually really help you avoid some of the gotchas that you might run into production, even if you're not able to mirror them in your test environment. The awareness and the ability of everyone to know right off the bat, okay, there's a document I can go to and I can look at and see maybe why my code might not be working.
So this comes to a lot of experience that we've had lately over in the DoD, where environments are rarely the same as what you're putting out in production. One thing I'll say though is that every minute you spend working either automation code or manual fixes on a problem that is due to an environmental difference is really wasted time. Okay, the time that you spent solving those little differences and making sure that, oh, well, yeah, you know, this machine doesn't have the same amount of memory, or the path to the storage is somewhere else, that's time you could be spending on actually solving the problem for your customer, your client. So I know it sounds real obvious. You make sure your environments are the same. Well, that'll never happen. But when they are different, make sure that it is plastered everywhere what the differences are. Do not squirrel away that knowledge somewhere where it's like, oh, only a few people know that, right? And centralize that in your automated tools. Make sure people know here's where this is different. Put it out in your logs and say, this is, you know, the type of thing that you won't see in production, right? People need to know that. That's another thing. They're expecting something that they saw in development, and when they're seeing it in production, they don't see it. More waste of time, right? So skimping on environments will cost you in the long run. If you're involved in planning and purchasing and acquisition, environments are key to development, keeping development costs low. If you invest in your environments, you're always going to get that money back in the time that you save when you're actually doing automation. The key to automation is repetitive. We're going to talk about this too, repetitive and doing it. It's the same every time, right? Item potency. You can't do that when environments are not the same. So keep that in mind. Invest in your environments. It'll always pay back in the long run.
Absolutely. And another thing about this test kitchen that you want to run is that you're trying to run this often, and you're trying to run this automatically. So where possible, we try to incorporate this into our pipeline. Chris, I'll let you talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. So CI/CD, right? Everyone's heard it. Does everyone do it though? Probably not, right? You want to really actually trigger code automatically and run it through your pipeline whenever you can. Every few minutes, hours at the best, day at the worst, right? You want to keep the exercise in that code every time that you see some diff come in on your code, and report that back to your developers automatically. Linting should be the first part of your pipeline. A lot of people think, oh, this is academic. Why do I have to worry about something like a check style, or why, code looks exactly the same? We've joked about how people have started and ended relationships over bracket styles. Everybody's seen the Silicon Valley episode, right? Well, I kind of agree with them in a little bit there. Code, again, as we said, is communication. And getting people to understand that we're speaking the same language and using the same styling is really important. And having to reinterpret and readjust and context switch to someone else's style of coding can be difficult. Now, we're not saying that everybody has to subscribe to some perfect way that you do it, but you should run linting before that you accept a merge request to make sure that things are clean, readable, and understandable to the standards agreed upon by your team, not some guy in the sky or some book or something like that, agreed upon by your team. Customize your linting, but do it. And the more often you run these tests all the way through the pipeline, whether that be unit tests, system state tests, smoke tests, it gives you a picture of the health of your code. That gets communicated to everybody on the team and to the people you work for and the people that work for you. Everybody understanding where we are saves from those stressful rushes. Oh my gosh, I didn't know that didn't work, right? Everybody should be, even if you're not working on a piece of the code, should be checking that pipeline when you get on in the morning and say, oh, okay, that's not working today. So there are no surprises.
Absolutely. Yeah, developing that clear picture of health and that clear communication throughout the automation process is just how your team can be more confident in allow that to run automatically by machine and not take up our time so we can do more exciting things. So let's go ahead and move into knowledge sharing and shared code and how we can communicate through this shared base of information that we have.
So one thing that we use a lot in automation code and DevSecOps is the idea of templates, right? You have OS templates, you can use Jinja templates, you can use ERB templates. There are all these different ways to template things. Use templates, right? Have a point of reference for code that you've established, you know it works, you know the team agrees on. Make examples, make templates that people can reuse. Put them out there where everyone knows that they are. If you see something being done a lot, templatize it. Get it in some library that is public for everyone. Having this common code that runs on all your nodes, that means everybody's starting from a known working point, right? Nobody ever even tries to reinvent the wheel. We know this works. If you want to change it, you can bring it up, remerge it, and the team can agree to change it. But keep those templates out there. And that means also new people that are changing, either coming on or changing what they're doing, can pick that up quickly. And it's a form of knowledge sharing. Templating and examples is probably one of the best forms of knowledge sharing. You and I all probably go out to Stack Overflow to look at things. Maybe some of us might cut and paste a little more too much code from there. But those are templates, right? The internet, we're looking for templates. Make those available for your team and everyone understand where they are and what they do.
Absolutely. And also every environment is going to require shared code. So throughout the time that you're developing your cookbooks, you're going to run into a lot of the same tasks and the same problems that your team is trying to tackle. And so what we can do is really comb through our code to find these common problems, to find this code that is written multiple times and condense it into something that can be shared and something that we can reference. These shared components should be things that don't change very often and things that can be referenced from other cookbooks. Chef makes it really easy to include other code by using include in our policy files, including a base policy, makes it really easy to write wrapper cookbooks, to include other cookbook code into our own, and also to reference common resources from another cookbook. So all of these tools can really be used to make sure that our team is not repeating itself over and over. So let's go ahead. Oh, yes, Jeff.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, and altogether, just to the title of the slide, what that does is it forms a common baseline. And that common baseline is something that people can use over and over again, and it iterates and matures. And you can use that again to communicate your bare minimum, your starting point, to even another team that's using your code.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and dive into not only having a common baseline, but how we can develop those other pieces, maybe smaller, those common shared resources that we can share throughout our team. So as I said before, resource sharing and using common resources in cookbooks is a way to accomplish similar tasks by using the same code and not having to rewrite it over and over again. So this allows us to reduce the amount of time our engineers are spending solving the same problems. This also allows us to develop our code in a really modular way. This means that we can kind of plug and play the pieces of our code to develop something new and to solve maybe more difficult or more complex problems by using these smaller building blocks. This also encourages item potency because as we develop these tasks, we say, okay, this one resource is going to do this thing the same way every single time. We can rely on that and we can know that this is going to be enforced no matter what, as long as I use this pre-written component by another member of my team. And then you can go ahead and be confident about the other changes that you're making that may be different or that may be new.
And we might be guilty a little bit here ourselves because we use the term dry, right? And for folks that don't know, dry is don't repeat yourself, right? We are also talking here about common naming schemes and not using, in government we use a lot of acronyms, probably not something that you should avoid. But by don't repeat yourself, we mean if you see something being done similarly in lots of places, extract that out. Get that out of your code and put it in one place and make a common library. One of the biggest points of errors and issues are when people try to do things slightly differently and people expect it to behave the same way. So that's just another point on the modularity. And back to the idea of discussing things and using common languages, naming schemes are also very important, right? When you want to talk about something, try to use real terms. We've all been guilty of using, insider code terms, cute little names. Maybe, we've got things named after superheroes or movies. You have plenty of them, but really nowadays it might make sense to start spelling things out a little more. And I know working with the government, the amount of 3-letter acronyms that we have in a day is just astounding. There's really a lot of inside lingo. We're trying to get away from that. We're trying to actually talk in plain verbiage and say, look, this is we're automating an Active Directory server. We're not deploying the ADDC, right? Things like that. Spell it out so people know what they're doing, and make your code readable. And that modularity, call the things that you separate out, call them what they are. If a library is to deploy a Kubernetes cluster, call it deploy Kubernetes cluster. Call it update certificates. Call it a real thing that everybody understands. So when you're going to look for that thing that you don't want to repeat, that somebody else has written, you know exactly what it's called, where it is, and how to reference it. So again, it's all about language, right? That's the key.
Exactly. And really, we've talked about a lot of different ways that you can, encourage communication on your team, that you can communicate as a leader, that you can communicate through your code, but there is no secret formula to this. This is just about finding the ways that your team can communicate effectively, and that's how you create a confident team.
Absolutely. And we don't want to lose sight with the way that we're all distributed now. We're all working in different places. We're using all these tools that kind of filter the humanity out of us in some ways. We want to not forget that we can't lose sight of the person on the other end that we're talking to. And that code is still written by humans and will always be, well, maybe not always, we'll see. But right now we need to work with people and have communicating ideas across people, from me to you, from you to me, and from someone you might not have even met yet. So it's important, though, to make sure that we are understanding there is no one way to do this. You need to adapt and be dynamic when it comes to working with different types of teams and different ways of communicating. Just stick to those points, though, that are important. Things like peer reviews, things like knowledge sharing, understanding that a leader is important. And if you do that, the rest will pretty much fall together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.